The Varian royal palace stood like a fortress of crystal and steel on the edge of the glowing world of Vareth. Tall towers reached toward the pale blue sky, and wide energy shields shimmered like sunlight on water. The palace was a symbol of power and grace, admired by the many worlds under Varian rule. Yet, deep within its walls, there was a room that no one dared to enter. It was said to hold something far too dangerous, something even the royal guards feared. The Varian royal family was known across the stars. The king was wise and strong, the queen was kind and fierce, and their son, the prince, was a leader admired by his people. But there was another child, a younger sister whose name was rarely spoken. To the people, she was a secret, a shadow behind the throne. To the guards, she was a warning. They called her the monster sister, though no one truly knew what she looked like. Stories whispered that her touch meant death. No creature had ever survived it. The truth was more complicated, but few cared to learn it. The princess, kept in a secluded wing of the palace, lived in silence. Her room was lined with containment fields that glowed faintly with energy. The walls were made of alloy so dense that even weapons could not breach it. Inside, she spent her days watching the stars through a single reinforced window. She was not evil. She was not cruel. She was simply alone. The reason for her isolation was a power she could not control. Since birth, her body had carried an unstable energy that surged when she touched another living being. Small animals that wandered too close would fall still. Brave soldiers who had tried to comfort her were reduced to nothing but empty armor. No one survived contact. Over time, fear turned into legend, and legend turned into a cage. But the princess was not without feelings. Every night, when the lights dimmed, she would sit by the window and dream of walking freely. She imagined the palace gardens, the sound of the crystal fountains, and the laughter of children she had never met. She wondered how it felt to hold a hand, to feel warmth that did not vanish at her touch. Her brother, the prince, cared for her deeply, but even he could not risk closeness. He spoke to her through layers of shielding, his voice soft, promising that he would one day find a way to help. That promise had kept her spirit alive, but hope had started to fade. The Varian people saw her as a danger, and even the palace staff moved quickly when near her wing. To them, she was a living storm locked in a cage. The king had brought scholars, engineers, and healers from many worlds, but no one could solve the mystery of her energy field. Some said it was a curse. Others said it was a gift too powerful to be contained. Whatever it was, it kept her alone. Far from Vareth, across the dark lanes of space, another world was recovering from a great storm. The galactic sectors had been hit by violent waves of cosmic energy, damaging trade routes and power grids. Among the travelers who came to offer aid was a human engineer named Mark. Humanity was not well known in this part of the galaxy. They were younger compared to other races, curious but resilient. Mark was no soldier, no noble, but he had a calm nature and steady hands. His work had gained a reputation for precision. He could fix things others would throw away. When the Varian king heard of his skill, he sent a request. Their palace had suffered damage to its energy cores during the storm, and few trusted outsiders with such important work. But the king believed that fresh eyes might see what others could not. So Mark was brought to Vareth under escort, his small ship docking at the great landing platforms below the palace. As he stepped out, Mark looked around with quiet awe. The Varian world was unlike anything he had seen. The air shimmered faintly, and the architecture was both sharp and graceful. Guards in silver armor stood at every corner, their weapons glowing faintly with stored energy. He felt their eyes on him, curious and watchful, but he kept his pace steady. The prince himself greeted him in the outer hall. Tall and broad, with markings like silver veins across his skin, the prince carried authority in every movement. Yet his voice was polite as he spoke. He explained the task, the damage to the power systems, and the importance of restoring stability. Mark listened carefully, asking few questions but noting every detail. He was given quarters near the work areas and a small team of assistants. Each day he moved through the palace, examining panels, replacing parts, and tuning energy lines. Though the Varian technology was more advanced than anything on Earth, Mark adapted quickly. He treated every piece of equipment like a puzzle, and his calm focus earned quiet respect. One day, while tracing power lines deep into the palace, Mark came across an area unlike the others. The corridors were empty, the air heavier somehow. The walls here were thicker, the lights dimmer. At the end of a long hall, a set of sealed doors stood with warning symbols glowing bright. Two guards stepped forward at his approach, their faces stern. "This wing is restricted," one said firmly. Mark raised his hand slightly. "I was following the energy readings. The lines lead here." "Is there a core behind these doors?" The guards looked at each other, uneasy. "There is nothing here for you. Stay clear of this area." "The king's orders." Mark nodded and turned away, but as he walked back, he could not help noticing something. Through a small viewing port in the distance, a faint light flickered. And for just a moment, he thought he saw movement, a figure standing alone, watching the same stars he had admired the night before. Mark's first days inside the Varian palace were filled with quiet work and constant curiosity. Every corridor felt alive with energy. The walls were not just walls but living metal, shifting slightly as power moved through them. Blue lights pulsed softly like a heartbeat, guiding him deeper each day. To Mark, this was more than a job. It was a chance to see a world few humans had ever stepped on, and he wanted to understand it piece by piece. The prince gave him full access to the palace systems, though always under watch. Two guards were assigned to follow him, not out of hostility but caution. They were silent most of the time, though one was younger and sometimes asked questions about Earth. Mark answered with a small smile, keeping his tone calm and friendly. He knew he was a guest in a world that trusted very few outsiders. The work came first, and trust would come later. Each morning, Mark reviewed the damaged systems. The storm had left unstable power surges across the palace. Energy cores flickered, and backup lines were strained. It was nothing he had not seen before, but the scale was larger. The Varian systems were elegant but complex. He treated them with care, studying each panel as if it were a rare artifact. His steady approach surprised the assistants assigned to him. They were used to quick repairs or heavy machinery, but Mark worked with his hands like a craftsman. He listened to the hum of the circuits, adjusted energy flows by feel, and often fixed issues before others could even explain the problem. The prince visited often to see the progress. He spoke little at first, but Mark noticed the pride in his voice when he talked about the palace. The prince explained that the palace was more than a home. It was a living symbol of the Varian people, their culture, and their unity. The power that ran through its walls was tied to the heart of the city beyond. When the storm damaged it, the people grew uneasy. Mark understood then why this job mattered so much. It was not only about fixing circuits but restoring trust and calm. One evening, while tracing a power conduit, Mark reached a section of the palace that seemed different. The halls were quieter, the guards more alert. The lights were softer here, almost muted, and a faint hum filled the air. His instruments showed that a large energy source was nearby, but the readings were strange. It was not a steady line like the others but an unpredictable pulse. Curious, Mark followed it until he reached a wide corridor ending in a sealed door. Warning signs glowed across the frame. Two guards stood firm in front of it. "This area is restricted," one said. His tone was not unkind but absolute. Mark stopped and showed his scanner. "The surge leads here. If the palace power is unstable, I need to make sure it is safe." The second guard shook his head. "This wing is not for outsiders. Turn back." Mark did not argue. He knew when to push and when to step back. He gave a small nod and turned away, though he made a mental note of the location. Something about the energy readings stayed with him. They were unstable, but not in a way that suggested damage. It was almost like a living pulse, rising and falling like a heartbeat. Later that night, as he reviewed the palace layout, he found that this section was not on any of his maps. It was a blank area, marked only with an old symbol he did not recognize. He asked one of the assistants about it, but the young Varian simply lowered his eyes and said, "That is the sealed wing. No one goes there. Not even we speak of it." Mark let the matter drop, but his curiosity grew. The next day, while working on a junction box near the same area, he caught a glimpse of something unexpected. There was a narrow observation port high in the wall, almost hidden in the shadows. Through it, he saw a faint light. At first, he thought it was a reflection, but then he saw movement. A figure stood at a distance, framed by the glow of containment fields. The figure was slender, almost fragile, with faint markings along the arms that shimmered like silver. For a brief second, the figure turned, and Mark saw eyes. They were bright and sad, fixed on something far beyond the walls. The sight lasted only a moment before the figure moved away, and the light dimmed. Mark said nothing to the guards. He kept his focus on the work, but the image stayed in his mind. Over the next few days, he noticed subtle things. Extra security near the wing. Supplies delivered but never explained. The prince sometimes passed that corridor but always with a serious look, never stopping. Mark began to piece together a quiet picture. Something important was hidden there, something the Varian family did not wish outsiders to know. On the fifth day, an unexpected event forced him closer to that secret. While adjusting a regulator near the central cores, a sudden power surge rattled the systems. Alarms echoed through the palace. Panels flickered, and the lights dimmed. His scanner traced the surge back to the sealed wing. Without waiting for orders, Mark and his team moved quickly to stabilize the flow. Guards blocked their way, but when Mark explained the surge was threatening the entire power grid, the captain hesitated. The prince himself arrived, his face tense. "What is happening?" the prince asked. "The surge is coming from that wing," Mark said calmly. "If I do not stabilize it, the entire palace could lose power." The prince studied him for a long moment. Then, with a quiet order, the guards stepped aside, though they kept their weapons ready. Mark entered the first layer of the sealed wing, tools in hand. The hum was louder here, the energy stronger. His instruments flickered with readings he had never seen. Something alive was behind these walls, something powerful. He worked quickly, adjusting circuits and rerouting power, his hands steady. The surge eased, the alarm stopped, and the lights returned to normal. Only then did he notice something. Through the shimmering barrier at the far end of the hall, a figure stood watching him. It was the same figure from before. The glow around her was stronger now, like a storm held in a fragile shell. She did not move closer, but she did not look away. For the first time, Mark understood. This was not just a sealed wing. This was a prison of light, and inside was someone the Varian world feared but could not destroy. Mark could not stop thinking about the girl behind the glowing barriers. The moment had been brief, but it stayed with him. She had not looked like a monster. She had not seemed dangerous, only lonely. Her eyes were bright yet sad, and her face carried the quiet expression of someone who had been waiting far too long. The next morning, Mark woke early and returned to his work. The palace was calmer after the power surge, but the memory of the sealed wing was fresh in his mind. He did not speak about it to anyone. The prince had given no explanation, and the guards avoided even glancing toward that corridor. It was clear that whatever was inside was a secret that even the Varian servants respected. Mark kept busy repairing the palace systems. He moved from hall to hall, tuning energy lines and checking the cores. His steady nature impressed the Varian workers. He never rushed, never wasted emotion. When he worked, it was as though the chaos around him did not exist. Yet, each time his tasks brought him near that hidden wing, he felt the same pull. On the fourth day after the surge, another small problem led him back toward that part of the palace. A power line was unstable, and the readings showed the fluctuation coming from a secondary grid close to the sealed area. Two guards stood at the entrance as always, their expressions unreadable. Mark showed them his scanner and explained the issue. They allowed him to work but kept a close watch on his every move. While he worked, he saw the observation port again. It was high up, nearly hidden behind a set of conduits. When the guards turned their heads, Mark glanced toward it. This time, he saw her clearly. She was standing near the barrier, her hands resting lightly on the shimmering surface. Her skin glowed faintly with silver patterns, and her hair seemed to catch the light like strands of glass. She was not terrifying. She was graceful and strangely calm, as though she had long accepted her fate. Their eyes met for just a second. Mark did not flinch. He did not look away. Instead, he gave the smallest nod, a quiet gesture of recognition. Her head tilted slightly, surprised, and then she stepped back. Before he could see more, the guards moved, blocking his view. That night, Mark thought about her more than he expected. Why was she locked away so carefully? Why did no one speak of her? Why did the prince look troubled whenever the sealed wing was mentioned? There was no anger in her eyes, only sadness and caution. If she was dangerous, it was not by choice. The following morning, the prince asked to meet him. They spoke in a quiet chamber, away from the workers. The prince's expression was serious. "You went near the sealed wing," he said. It was not an accusation, more a statement of fact. "I followed the power lines," Mark replied calmly. "The systems run through that area. I only did my work." The prince studied him for a moment. "I believe you. But I must warn you. That wing is not like the rest of the palace. There is someone there who cannot be approached. For her safety and yours, keep your distance." Mark hesitated, then asked, "She is your sister, isn't she?" The prince's eyes narrowed slightly but not in anger. "Few know that. She is my blood. She is my responsibility. And she is cursed with a power none can withstand." "Cursed," Mark repeated softly. "From birth, her body carried an energy unlike anything we have seen. It is not evil, but it is deadly. When she touches another living being, the energy reacts and destroys. We tried to help her, but every attempt ended in loss. So we keep her safe. It is the only way to protect her and everyone else." Mark listened in silence. There was pain in the prince's voice, the kind that came from years of helplessness. "She seemed lonely," Mark said gently. The prince looked away. "Lonely does not begin to describe it. But there is nothing we can do. Her touch is fatal. Many brave ones tried to reach her, and none returned. If you value your life, stay away. This is not cruelty. This is mercy." Mark nodded slowly. He understood rules, but he also understood people. The sadness in the prince's words told him more than the warning did. This was not about danger alone. It was about a family's pain. Later that day, while adjusting a stabilizer near the same wing, another small event occurred. A tool slipped from his hand and rolled across the floor. It stopped near the observation port. When Mark went to pick it up, he looked again. She was there, closer than before, her face near the barrier. Her eyes studied him with quiet curiosity. This time, Mark raised his hand, not close to the barrier but slightly away, a simple greeting. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, she lifted her own hand and mirrored his motion, placing her palm against the glowing shield. It was not a touch, but it was the closest thing she had to one. Neither spoke. Neither moved closer. But in that silent moment, a connection formed. He was not afraid, and she seemed almost relieved. When the guards approached, she stepped back again, fading into the glow. Mark returned to his work without a word, but his mind was restless. He had seen many things in his life, repaired machines others had given up on, but this was different. This was not a machine. This was a person trapped in a cage of light. Mark woke up earlier than usual the next day. Something about the silent gesture from the girl in the sealed wing stayed in his mind like a thread pulling him back. He tried to focus on his work, but every hum of the palace system seemed to carry a question he could not shake. Who was she beyond the rumors? What was life like behind those glowing walls? And why, when she looked at him, did she seem less like a monster and more like a prisoner? The palace that morning was busy. Repairs were moving faster, and workers were everywhere. The storm's damage was almost fully controlled now, and Mark had earned the quiet respect of those around him. Even the guards, who had been cold at first, now gave him short nods when he passed. The prince stopped by to check the progress and thanked him in his formal but sincere way. Mark worked through panels and conduits, but his mind wandered. Each corridor he passed brought him closer to the sealed wing, and each time, he felt the same pull. He was careful, never breaking rules openly, but he was observant. He noticed supply carts coming in and out of that section. He saw the guards always on alert, but also tired, as if they had guarded that place for too many years. By midday, another surge occurred, though smaller than before. It came from a secondary grid, the same one that connected to the sealed area. Alarms did not ring, but Mark knew the signs. A sudden power dip could turn dangerous quickly. He and two assistants rushed to stabilize it. When they arrived, the guards already stood ready, tense and alert. Mark showed them his scanner calmly. There is a fluctuation. I need to see the regulator. It is close to this section. The captain of the guard hesitated but then stepped aside, watching every move. Mark went to the junction panel, tools ready, and began working. His hands were steady, his mind focused. But even as he worked, he could feel a presence. When the surge was contained, a faint sound came from behind the glowing barrier. It was not loud, just a soft hum, almost like a voice but carried through energy. Mark turned slightly, and there she was again. The sister. She was closer this time, her hand resting on the barrier, her eyes fixed on him. There was no fear in her gaze. There was curiosity, and something softer, perhaps surprise that someone kept returning. Mark did not move closer, but he raised his hand slightly in greeting. She mirrored the motion again, palm to the barrier, a silent exchange. The captain of the guard noticed but said nothing. Perhaps he knew there was no harm in a gesture. Perhaps he saw that the human was calm and not foolish. Then, without warning, the building shook. A deeper surge, stronger this time, rippled through the palace. The lights flickered, and the barrier around the sealed room shimmered unevenly. Alarms finally blared, and the guards stiffened. "Stabilize the line," the captain ordered. Mark was already moving. His scanner showed the surge was close to critical. He pulled open the panel and adjusted the flow, but something was different. This was not just a power fault. It was the sealed chamber itself. Energy was building inside, unstable and dangerous. Another tremor shook the walls. One of the assistants stumbled, dropping a toolkit. The noise startled the guards, and the captain turned to issue orders. At that moment, the barrier flickered once more. A loud hum filled the corridor, and the safety lights shifted to red. Mark looked up just as a section of the shield failed. It was brief, only a second, but in that second, the chamber was open. The girl stumbled forward, caught off guard by the sudden change. She lost her balance, her body tilting toward the hall. Instinct took over. Mark moved without thinking. He dropped his tools and stepped forward, catching her before she could fall. His hands closed around hers, steadying her. The guards shouted, their voices sharp, but no strike came. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Mark felt her weight against him, light and tense. He expected pain, a surge of energy, maybe even the end. But nothing came. No burning, no shock. Her hands were warm, trembling, but harmless. The girl froze, her eyes wide with disbelief. She stared at his face, then down at their joined hands. It was as if time itself had stopped. Her lips parted as though to speak, but no sound came. The guards were stunned. Even the captain, who had seen many things, could not hide his shock. "Release her," one guard said, but his voice was unsteady. Mark slowly loosened his grip but did not step back. The girl pulled her hands close to her chest, still staring. There was no danger, no reaction from her strange energy. For the first time in her life, someone had touched her and lived. The barrier restored itself with a flash, sealing her back inside. The moment was gone as quickly as it came, but the silence afterward was heavier than before. The captain finally spoke, his voice firm. "Leave this area. Now." Mark did not argue. He gathered his tools calmly, his face unreadable, and walked back toward the main hall. His heart was steady, but his mind was racing. He had held her hand. He had touched the one no one dared to touch, and nothing had happened. Inside the sealed chamber, the girl sat down slowly, her hands still trembling. She looked at her palms as if they belonged to someone else. For the first time since she could remember, there was warmth where there had always been fear. The sealed wing was silent after the event, but that silence was heavy. The guards said nothing as they escorted Mark back to the main halls. They did not shout, they did not threaten, but their eyes followed him with sharp attention. They were not sure what they had just seen. No one was sure. Mark stayed calm, his hands steady as always. Inside, though, his thoughts moved fast. He had held her hand. The girl they called the monster sister. The one no one could touch. He had felt her skin, soft and warm, not deadly. No energy burned through him, no sudden pain, no loss. Just a trembling girl who looked more surprised than he was. Later that day, he was summoned to the prince's private chamber. The prince stood near a wide window, looking out over the bright world of Vareth. He turned when Mark entered, his face calm but serious. "You touched her," the prince said. Mark did not deny it. She was falling. The barrier failed. "I caught her." The prince studied him closely. "And you are alive?" "Yes," Mark said simply. The prince's hands tightened behind his back. "No one has ever survived contact with her. Not one. You are the first." Mark stayed silent, letting the weight of the words settle. "She is my sister," the prince continued. "Since her birth, her touch has been death. We built walls, shields, anything to keep her and others safe. Many tried to reach her. Some were brave soldiers, others were skilled healers. They all failed. And yet, a human she has never seen holds her hand, and nothing happens. Explain this." Mark shook his head. "I cannot explain it. But I know what I saw. She was afraid when the barrier dropped, not angry. She is not a monster. She is just alone." The prince's expression softened for a moment, but his voice stayed firm. "Alone or not, her power is real. We cannot risk a mistake. But this changes something. You are different. Perhaps your body resists what others cannot. Perhaps your mind is calmer. I do not know. But now I must decide what this means." He walked closer. Do not speak of this to anyone. The court does not know. The people cannot know. If they hear that she touched someone, they will demand answers, and fear will rise again. Do you understand? I do, Mark said. But even as he spoke, word began to move through quiet channels. The guards had seen. The assistants had whispered. Soon the palace carried the rumor like a spark waiting to catch fire. That night, Mark stayed in his quarters, but sleep would not come. His mind kept replaying the moment, the shock in her eyes, the way her hand had trembled. It was not the reaction of someone used to hurting others. It was the reaction of someone who feared herself. The next morning, things changed. The sealed wing was under even tighter guard. No one was allowed near it without direct orders. Scientists moved in and out, carrying scanners and strange devices. Mark was not called, but he could feel the tension. The palace was shifting around a secret it could not hold much longer. The prince met him again that afternoon. This time he was not alone. A group of advisors stood with him, their faces stern. We need to test this, the prince said. If your presence is the reason, we must know. If this is chance, we must know that too. I do not wish to risk her life or yours, but knowledge is our only path forward. Mark agreed quietly. Under heavy watch, they led him back to the sealed wing. The girl was already there, standing near the barrier. She seemed calmer, but her eyes were alert, curious. The scientists worked quickly, adjusting controls, lowering the barrier just enough for contact. Do not move unless we tell you, the captain warned. Mark stepped forward slowly, his hands open. The girl watched every motion, but she did not step back. When he stopped, only a thin field of energy separated them. The prince gave the order. The barrier shimmered and lowered, leaving only silence. Mark extended his hand. Slowly, carefully, the girl raised hers. For a moment, neither touched. Then her fingers met his. No surge. No shock. The scientists gasped quietly, recording every reading. The prince watched, still and silent. The girl blinked, her lips parting slightly, but she said nothing. Mark spoke softly, his voice even. It is all right, he said. I am here. She let her hand rest in his, light and cautious. It was a fragile moment, but it was real. When they pulled away, the room was filled with whispers. Machines beeped, data flashed, but all of it said the same thing. The human was unharmed. The prince turned to his advisors. This changes everything. Mark was led out, but he caught one last glance of the girl. She stood where she was, still watching him, but this time there was something new in her eyes. It was not only surprise. It was hope. That evening, as Mark walked through the palace, the workers looked at him differently. Some curious, some cautious. He heard pieces of talk in the halls. They say he touched her. They say he lived. They say she smiled. The prince met him again before night fell. This is no longer a rumor, he said. Our people will learn soon, and they will ask questions. Some will fear. Some will want to use this for power. And some will see it as a sign. We must be ready. Mark nodded. What do you want me to do? The prince looked out at the glowing city beyond. Stay close. She trusts you now. And perhaps, just perhaps, you are the key to freeing her. In the sealed wing, the girl sat by the barrier with her hands folded. She looked at her palms again, tracing invisible lines. For the first time, she wondered what it might feel like to walk among others. For the first time, she believed it might be possible. The palace was no longer the same after the discovery. Every hall seemed louder with quiet talk. The guards kept their faces straight, but their eyes followed Mark wherever he walked. The assistants whispered when they thought he could not hear. The rumor had become more than a rumor now. A human had touched the monster's sister and lived. The prince tried to keep it contained, but news traveled faster than walls could hold. Advisors pressed for answers, scientists demanded more tests, and some nobles feared what this meant for their people. To the Varian world, the girl was not only a sister. She was a symbol of power and danger. If she could now be touched by one man, what did that mean for their safety? What did it mean for their control? Mark kept to his work. He did not argue, did not explain. When asked, he said little. I only did what was needed, he told the workers. But inside, he carried the weight of what had happened. He remembered her hands trembling. He remembered the way she had looked at him like someone seeing sunlight for the first time. The prince called for a private meeting. It was in the same quiet chamber as before, but now the air was heavier. Several advisors were there. The captain of the guard stood near the door. You have seen the change, the prince said. This is no small thing. Some will want to believe this is hope. Others will call it weakness. And some will want to use it. Use it how? Mark asked. There are enemies who would do anything to take her, the prince said. To them, she is a weapon. Her power could destroy armies. Until now, she was untouchable. But you have shown that she can be near someone without harm. They will want to know how. They will want to own it. Mark stayed calm. Then we protect her. The prince gave a small nod. We will. But protection will not be enough. The storm damaged our systems, and our enemies know it. Already there are signs of movement on the border. They think we are weak. They think the secret inside this palace can be stolen. If they come, they will come for her. That warning came true sooner than expected. 2 nights later, alarms broke the silence. The palace shook slightly as heavy craft descended outside the city. It was not a full attack but a test. A group of unknown ships entered orbit, sending small strike teams toward the capital. The palace shields rose, but damage from the storm had left weak points. The prince moved fast, commanding his forces. The guards were everywhere, and the scientists were ordered to seal the wing completely. But in the sealed chamber, the girl stood near the barrier, sensing something. Her energy hummed softly, reacting to the tension in the air. Mark was in the lower halls, working on a stabilizer when the alarm started. He moved quickly toward the control rooms, but a runner stopped him. The prince requests you, the guard said. Now. Mark followed without hesitation. The control room was bright and full of voices, each officer speaking fast, relaying reports. The prince turned when Mark entered. The attack is small, but they are testing us, he said. We must hold. But there is something else. My sister feels the tension. Her power is stirring. If she loses control, even our own people could be harmed. Mark understood. She needs calm. She needs you, the prince said plainly. They moved quickly through secured halls until they reached the sealed wing. The chamber glowed brighter than before. Energy fields rippled like water, showing her stress. The scientists warned that the readings were rising. She is reacting to fear, one of them said. The whole palace is on edge. It feeds her power. The prince looked at Mark. Can you reach her? I can try, Mark said. The guards hesitated but made way. The barrier was lowered slightly, enough for voice and sight but still safe. Mark stepped forward slowly. She was standing in the center of the room, her silver patterns glowing like living light. Her eyes were wide, scanning the walls as if she could see the movement outside. Hey, Mark said softly. His voice was calm, steady. It is all right. You are safe. Her gaze turned to him. The glow softened slightly. Listen to me, Mark continued. Nothing will happen to you. Your brother is here. I am here. You do not have to be afraid. The hum lowered, though the light still flickered. He stepped closer, one hand raised. "Remember," he said. "You touched me. Nothing happened. I am still here. You are not dangerous to me. You are not alone." She stared at his hand, then slowly moved forward. Her own hand lifted, unsure but drawn to the calm in his voice. The barrier shimmered as it lowered more. Their hands met again, and the glow around her steadied. The readings flattened. The scientists looked at their screens in awe. "She is stabilizing," one whispered. The prince let out a breath. Mark kept his hand firm and his voice even. "Good. That is good. You are in control. They cannot hurt you, and you will not hurt them. Trust yourself." Outside, the enemy ships turned back. The test was over, and the palace remained unbroken. But inside, something far greater had happened. The girl had faced the storm within her and steadied it. When the barrier rose again, she stayed near it, her eyes fixed on Mark. For the first time, she looked not only curious but confident. The prince placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. "You have done more than repair a palace. You may have given her a future." Mark looked once more at the girl. He gave a small nod, silent but clear. She nodded back, a faint smile almost forming on her face. The palace was quiet again after the attack, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was not fear that hung in the air but a strange calm mixed with hope. Every guard had seen the screens. Every advisor had heard the reports. The girl who was once feared, the one called the monster sister, had stood steady because a human held her hand. Mark did not see himself as a hero. He was tired. The work from the storm had left him with sore muscles and little rest. But he could not ignore what had changed. Wherever he walked, people stepped aside, not out of fear but out of respect. Even the guards who once watched him closely now gave short nods. The prince had changed too. He walked with less tension, though his eyes still carried the weight of a leader. When he met Mark that morning, he said, "My sister is asking for you. She wants to see you without barriers." Those words were simple, but they meant more than Mark expected. The wing that had once been sealed now had opened doors. The hum of shields was gone. The heavy guards stood farther back. Inside, the room was brighter. The girl sat on a low platform, her silver patterns calm, almost soft. When she saw Mark, she stood and stepped forward. Her movements were no longer fearful. She held herself with quiet strength. "You came," she said in a voice that was almost shy but steady. "I said I would," Mark answered. For a moment they stood, just looking at each other. Then she held out her hand. There was no barrier, no suit, no shield. Mark took it without hesitation. Her touch was warm, and this time there was no tremor of power. The scientists who had gathered near the walls were silent. They had no words. Some even smiled, a rare sight in that hall. The prince entered soon after. He watched them and said, "It seems the impossible is now ordinary. But this is only the start. There will be questions. There will be demands. Other worlds will want to know how this is possible." Mark nodded. "They will want to control it." "Yes," the prince said, "but they cannot control her anymore. She has found balance, and it started with you. Now we must decide how to show the world who she is." The days that followed were unlike any the palace had seen. Tests were done, but they were not tests of danger anymore. They were tests of trust. The girl walked through rooms she had never been allowed to enter. She spoke to people who had only seen her on screens. And every time she reached for Mark's hand, the room relaxed. Word spread far beyond the palace. Other cities sent messages. Leaders of distant colonies asked for meetings. Some came with fear, some with wonder. They wanted to see the girl and the human who could calm her. Mark did not enjoy attention, but he understood its value. He stayed close, helping when needed, always calm. The girl learned quickly. She was curious about everything. She asked about the world beyond the palace. She asked about Earth, about what humans were like, about things as simple as rain and wind. One day she said, "I want to walk outside. Not behind walls, not with guards everywhere. Just walk." The prince hesitated at first, but he saw her eyes and then looked at Mark. "If you are with her," he said, "she will be safe." So it happened. They left the palace. The city was quiet when they arrived, the streets lined but not crowded. People came to see but kept their distance. The girl walked slowly, her hand in Mark's, her silver patterns glowing faintly in the sunlight. A small child in the crowd stepped forward, holding a flower. The guards tensed, but Mark gave a small nod. The girl knelt, her long hair catching the light, and accepted the flower with care. The crowd gasped, then softened. Fear turned into quiet wonder. In that moment, she was no longer a hidden danger. She was something else entirely. Later that night, the prince met with his advisors. "We have hidden for too long," he said. "But she is not something to hide anymore. She is my sister. She is Varian. And with the right hands, she will be our bridge to worlds beyond." The advisors agreed, though some still carried doubts. But no one could deny what they had seen. The weeks became months. Repairs were finished, and the palace became stronger than before. The girl spent more time outside, always with Mark nearby. She began to laugh more, to learn new things, to live. The people accepted her slowly but surely. One evening, as the sun set beyond the towers, she and Mark stood on the high balcony. The air was calm, the city lights below like a field of stars. "You changed everything," she said softly. "No," Mark said. "You did. I only held out my hand." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that carried no fear. The prince joined them, standing on the other side. "Perhaps this is what fate wanted," he said. "A human to remind us that sometimes power is not meant to be feared. It is meant to be understood." They stood there in silence for a time, watching the night settle over the world. For the first time, the girl was not a secret, not a weapon, not a danger. She was simply herself. And by her side stood the one person who had seen her not as a monster but as a sister, as a friend, and perhaps something more one day. The galaxy would remember many things about that time, but the story would always start the same way. It would say that no one survived touching the alien prince's monster sister until a human held her hand and changed everything.